The night Elira Voss arrived at Blackthorn Castle, the moon hid behind thick clouds, as though it did not wish to witness what was about to happen. She stood at the gates, wrapped in a plain gray cloak, clutching a small bag that held everything she owned. She had traveled 3 days from her village, escorted by guards who barely spoke to her, and now she stood before the tall iron doors of the most powerful pack in the kingdom. She was here to become Luna, not because anyone loved her. Not because she had asked for this life. She was here because her pack's Alpha had signed an agreement with Alpha King Kale Blackthorn, and Elira was the price of peace between two territories that had once been on the edge of war. Lonan, Kale did not come to greet her personally. Instead, his beta, a tall man named Draven with sharp eyes and a permanent frown, led her through the stone corridors. The castle was beautiful in a cold way, all dark wood and iron chandeliers, but it did not feel like a home. It felt like a fortress, built to keep people out, or perhaps to keep someone in. "The Alpha King will see you tomorrow," Draven said, stopping in front of a narrow door at the base of a tower staircase. "For now, you will stay here." Elira looked up the winding stone steps, her stomach tightening. Here? Not in the Luna's chambers? Draven did not meet her eyes. "The Alpha King has his reasons. This is not a discussion." She nodded, because she had learned long ago that arguing rarely changed anything. She climbed the stairs alone, her bag heavy on her shoulder, and found a small room at the top. It had a bed, a window overlooking the dark forest, and little else. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the trees swaying in the wind, wondering what kind of man would marry a woman and then hide her away before even speaking to her. She did not know that the Alpha King had his own reasons for caution. 3 years earlier, a woman claiming to love him had nearly destroyed his entire pack from the inside, feeding information to a rival Alpha who wanted Blackthorn territory for himself. Kale had trusted her completely. That trust had cost him dozens of his own people, including his younger sister. Since then, he had built walls around his heart so thick that even his closest friends struggled to reach him. When word came that a peace treaty required him to take a new mate, Kale agreed, only because refusing meant war. But he made his own rules. His new Luna would not be given power. She would not be given trust. She would be watched, and if she gave him any reason to believe she was a threat, he would deal with her the way he dealt with all threats. He did not consider, even for a moment, that she might simply be a frightened young woman, with nothing but her own quiet strength to protect her. The next morning, Kale finally met Elira in the Great Hall. He sat on a raised chair at the far end of the room, and she was made to stand before him like someone awaiting judgment. He studied her carefully. She was smaller than he expected, with tired eyes that held more sadness than fear. There was nothing about her that seemed dangerous, and yet he had learned not to trust appearances. "You will remain in the North Tower," he said, his voice flat and final. "You will not attend pack meetings. You will not walk freely through the grounds without an escort. This is not punishment. This is caution." Elira lifted her chin, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I did not ask to come here, Alpha King. I did not ask for this marriage, but I am not your enemy." "That remains to be seen," Kale answered, and then he turned away, as though the conversation was already finished. She was led back to the tower, and the door was locked behind her that evening for the first time. She heard the sound of the key turning, and felt something inside her chest crack quietly, like thin ice under a careful step. Days became weeks. Elira's world shrank to the small tower room and the narrow window that overlooked the forest. Meals were brought to her by silent servants who rarely spoke more than a few words. She was allowed no visitors, no pack gatherings, no chance to prove she was anything other than what Kale assumed her to be. The isolation was its own kind of cruelty, quiet and slow, wearing down her spirit one lonely day at a time. She tried, at first, to stay hopeful. She would sing softly to herself, remembering songs her mother once sang. She would trace patterns in the frost on her window and imagine stories about the birds that landed on the sill. But hope is a fragile thing when it is given nothing to hold on to, and slowly, Elira's quiet songs turned into quiet tears. She cried most nights, careful to keep her voice low so no one would hear. She cried for the family she had left behind, for the life she had been forced to give up, and for the husband who looked at her like she was a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be known. She did not know that her tears were doing something no one in the castle could have imagined. Elira's mother had once told her stories about their family's history, whispered tales of an ancestor who carried the blood of the very first wolf, a spirit so powerful that the early packs had feared and worshipped it in equal measure. Elira had always believed these were simply bedtime stories, meant to comfort a child who often felt like she did not belong anywhere. She never imagined they might be true. Deep within her, sealed away by generations of quiet blood and forgotten magic, something ancient had been sleeping. It was not a curse, and it was not a monster. It was a guardian spirit, bound long ago after a terrible war between packs, hidden safely inside a bloodline until it was needed again. The old magic required something rare to wake it. Not violence, not command, but the honest, unguarded sorrow of someone who had been wrongly cast aside. Every night that Elira cried alone in that tower, the seal around the ancient wolf grew thinner. In the castle below, strange things began to happen. Old Mira, the pack's elderly seer, started waking from dreams that left her hands shaking and her mind foggy with images she could not explain. She saw eyes glowing gold in darkness. She saw a wolf larger than any she had known, standing protectively over a small, weeping figure. She brought her visions to Kale, though he was slow to listen. "There is old power stirring, Alpha King," she told him one evening, her voice trembling with the weight of what she had seen. "Something ancient, something connected to your Luna." Kale frowned, unwilling to believe it. Elira is nothing but a frightened girl, locked in a tower. What power could she possibly have? "Perhaps," Mira said carefully. "That is exactly why you should be worried. Power does not always look the way we expect." Kale dismissed her words at first, too consumed by old wounds to consider that his caution might be causing new ones. But the signs grew harder to ignore. The moon began rising with a faint reddish glow that unsettled even the eldest wolves in the pack. Animals in the forest grew restless, howling at odd hours, as though sensing a shift in the world around them. Even Draven, usually calm and composed, admitted that something in the air felt different, heavier, like the stillness before a storm. Still, Kale did not go to Elira. Pride and fear kept him distant, even as unease grew in his chest. He told himself he was protecting his pack. In truth, he was afraid of what it might mean to open his heart again, even a little, after being betrayed so completely before. Then came the night that changed everything. A rival pack, sensing weakness and hoping to seize Blackthorn territory while its Alpha King seemed distracted by unrest, launched a surprise attack under cover of darkness. Warriors poured through the forest, moving fast and silent, catching many of Kale's guards off balance. The sound of battle shattered the quiet night, cries and growls echoing off the castle walls. Elira heard it from her tower window, her heart pounding as she watched shapes moving through the trees and flashes of movement near the gates. Fear gripped her, but beneath the fear was something else, something she had never felt so strongly before. A fierce, protective instinct rose inside her, sharp and undeniable. She thought of Kale, cold and distant as he had been, and she thought of the pack members who had never wronged her, simple guards and servants who did not deserve to suffer for a war they did not choose. She could not simply sit and watch. With trembling hands, she pulled at the door, and for the first time, found that fear itself seemed to lend her strength she did not know she had. The old lock gave way beneath her desperate effort, and she ran down the tower stairs, ignoring every instinct that told her to stay hidden and safe. She reached the courtyard just as Kale was pushed back by 3 attackers at once, his strength faltering after protecting his people for hours without rest. Elira's voice tore through the chaos as she shouted his name, drawing his attention for just a moment, but that moment was enough for one of the attackers to lunge toward her instead. Something inside Elira broke open in that instant, not from fear, but from a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and locked away. All the sorrow she had carried in silence, all the tears she had cried alone in that tower, gathered together like a wave finally reaching the shore. A brilliant light surrounded her, and where a frightened young woman had stood only a heartbeat before, there now stood a wolf of impossible size and beauty, fur pale as moonlight, eyes glowing with ancient gold. The ancient wolf had awakened at last, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a guardian, answering a call it had waited generations to hear. The battlefield fell silent for a moment, both sides frozen in stunned disbelief. Then the ancient wolf moved, swift and powerful, standing between the invaders and the people of Blackthorn. It did not attack with cruelty. It simply became an unstoppable wall of protection, forcing the rival warriors back step by step until fear overcame their ambition, and they fled into the forest, abandoning their assault entirely. When the light faded, and Elira stood once more in her human form, exhausted and trembling, Kale rushed to her side before she could even fall. He caught her in his arms, staring down at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something between awe and shame. "You saved us," he said quietly. "You saved all of us." Elira looked up at him, too tired to hide the hurt still lingering in her eyes. "You locked me away because you were afraid of what I might be, and still, I could not stand by and watch you fall." Kale's throat tightened with words he did not know how to say. In that moment, he understood how deeply his fear had blinded him, how close he had come to losing something precious, simply because he refused to look past his own pain. In the days that followed, Kale did everything he could to make amends. He released Elira from the tower for good, moving her into the Luna's chambers where she belonged. He asked the pack to gather, and in front of every wolf under his command, he acknowledged her not as a political obligation, but as his true Luna, someone whose courage had saved them all when his own strength had not been enough. Old Mira watched with quiet satisfaction as the two stood together before the pack, sensing that the old prophecy had finally been fulfilled, not through conquest or fear, but through compassion finally allowed to bloom. The ancient wolf's awakening was not an ending, she told anyone who asked, but the beginning of a stronger, wiser era for Blackthorn Kingdom. Elira did not forget the loneliness of those long nights in the tower, nor the tears that had once felt like weakness but had, in truth, carried more strength than she ever realized. Yet as Kale took her hand that evening, his walls finally lowered, she allowed herself to believe that healing was possible, for both of them, and that sometimes the very things we try hardest to hide away are the things capable of saving us all.